So with distance learning, I am teaching the kids at home their schooling that they need to do at school. And I decided, why not throw in a shop class, because that's what I'm familiar with.
Hi.
So with the weather warming up, I decided that we would build some cornhole boards. And I have a helper today that's going to learn how to build them. You excited?
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. Now, of course, you must first start off with temperature readings on your garage door. And sander. These days, you can never be too careful. A lot of plans make the frame out of 2x4s. However, I used cedar 1x4s just to make it a bit lighter. I cut 45s. However, if I had to do this again, I would have joined it straight and used dowels just to make it stronger. I used a pocket hole jig to pre-drill the holes. To attach, I used wood glue and screws. By using the pocket hole screws, it gave it a strong hold while also hiding the hardware. I wanted to make this project achievable for a beginner woodworker, so I bought plywood from the hardware store that was already 2 feet by 4 feet, which is luckily the size of a cornhole board. You could also buy a large sheet of plywood and have it cut down for you. One full sheet of plywood will make 2 sets of boards. The problem I ran across was with the top 1x4 board. Because it was not attached to the side pieces with a dowel, as I mentioned earlier, it becomes weak when the legs are out and pushing against it. So I may go back and put a bracket on the top for strength, but it's good for now. I cut the feet 12 inches long with a 15-degree cut on one side. The 15-degree angle will make them sit directly on the ground when this is set up. Using a round vase, I drew the curve on one of the boards to use as a guide. This curve will be very important because it will help the legs to open and close without hitting against the back of the frame. Using the jigsaw, I cut the line, then smoothed the edges with sandpaper. I used the finished leg as a template for the other 3 feet, just so that they would match up exactly. I pre-drilled the holes in the legs just to make sure that they were centered correctly. At this point, I had to go look for the little delinquent who's cutting my shop class. Hey, you're missing your shop class.
Don't annoy me, I'm doing PE.
That darn PE. Lacrosse practice managed to break a window a few weeks ago. Can you see it there? Looks like yet another project to add to my list. Well, since I couldn't interrupt PE, it looks like I'm attaching the legs on my own. I used a clamp to hold the leg in place while I screwed a hole through the frame. Then I put in a carriage bolt. In hindsight, I should have used a larger drill bit so I wouldn't have to use the negotiator. But come on. When you're cooped up for months on end, sometimes this is just exactly what you need. An excuse to go pound away on this. Using glue and pocket holes, I attached a board to both legs. This is to make the legs move together. So when putting these boards up or taking them down, you can grab that middle board and pull on it, and both legs will work together. To get the circle centered, I measured 9 inches down from the top and centered from side to side. Then I drilled a screw into the spot. I created a jig out of scrap wood with 2 holes 3 inches apart. Using the screw as a pivot, I drew a circle with a pencil. This will give me a 6-inch circle. I drilled a hole to give me a starting point for the saw. Then I used the jigsaw and followed the lines as best I could. I cleaned up the edges with sandpaper. At this point, you could paint the boards however you want. I was inspired by a blogger, Our Faux Farmhouse, who used a similar pattern. There are many shops on Etsy that will create custom vinyls for you. However, since I have a Cricut machine, I decided to make my own. I started by placing 2 of the vinyl sheets onto the board, making sure to measure it out completely. For the painting, I decided to go look for my little buddy. The pasture is usually a good place to start. Good muddy spot. And I found my kiddos working away on their fort. Gotta love the snow boots.
Hey, Mama,
Like those work boots there.
what I've been working on.
All right. And what are you making down here?
A little fort.
You are?
And the leash protects the droplet from coming in. And we're gonna put this where you protect the horse poop over there, so there will be no slugs.
Well, I definitely cannot interrupt slug protection in the fort. So it looks like I will be doing the painting solo. I wanted to talk briefly on the vinyls. It was a little tricky getting them lined up perfectly. I had to go slow and really think it through. The vinyl leaves just a slight frame around your piece. So to get them to line up, I had to actually cut off the frame to make the 2 pieces line up so that the circle would continue around. Now I only did 2 vinyls at a time, so essentially half of my piece, because I felt that that would be more easily accomplished than doing it all at once. Now let's talk paint. As you know, I tend to always use chalk paints when it comes to vinyls, and that's just because it's thicker and it tends to not seep underneath it. I'm left with a crisp black line rather than something that is seeped underneath and left spots. A satin black would be a way better choice in so many ways. However, I'm just not confident that it wouldn't seep under and leave me with a giant mess. I wanted a black stripe right down the middle. However, I also wanted it to have a slight gap between it and the middle circle. So I used some of the scraps that were left over from the vinyl to give me that arc. Then I used painter's tape to mark off the edges of the line. This did such a great job, and it left nice, clean edges. Don't forget to also put tape on the top and the bottom. Now at this point, I did paint with the same black that I used before. However, I did not get that on camera. One of the things that attracted me to this design so much was the light staining on it. So I ended up using blue tape, and as you can see, I'm cutting slight round edges to where it will line up to the circle, just again to give it a slight distance off of it. The blue tape will just create a barrier so that the stain will not stain that section of the wood. And at this point, I just used a very light stain. I put it on and immediately took it back off so that it only left a slight stain to the board. I put on 2 coats of sealant just to protect these boards from the weather. I don't plan to leave them outside, but I'm sure on occasion they'll be left out there or potentially something will get spilled on them, and I want them to be easily cleaned up. I want them to stay nice, looking sharp, and looking great out there. This will also protect them from the sun and the heat in the summer. If you're looking for a good weekend build, maybe something to give your dad for Father's Day, then this is something good to do, and you can personalize it for him. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future builds.